I wanted to start by introducing Padmavajra. Does anybody not know Padmavajra? Does anybody? You've never seen him before? Okay, yeah, good, okay. Yes, I was just thinking back to a friend of mine many, many years ago, and who was really, really concerned to communicate. He always wanted to be in communication. And sometimes, frankly, wasn't very pleasant. Sometimes his idea of communication was always a sort of, head-to-head, what's going on kind of thing. What I feel with Padmavajra is what I always get is love. I mean, that's the quality that I really most admire about Padmavajra, his love. I don't think any other word would be good enough. Metta always sounds far too far too technical. That's the word. Metta sounds what? Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think it's to do with the fact that it's a foreign language and like a dead language. Anyway, you need that. You need that word love. You need. Because that's what we all want, isn't it, really, is we want to be loved, we want to experience love, we want to live in a world in which love is present. And that's my experience of Padmavajra. Pretty much every time I meet him, I don't think I've ever met you when I didn't feel that was present. An open heart, by love I mean an open-heartedness, an outward-goingness, a quickness to smile. According to the Pali sources, they say that the Buddha was always the first to smile, which I always find very striking. That so often when you meet someone, you're sort of waiting to judge the interaction. Do you like them or not? Do they like you or not? And so on. Whereas the Buddha apparently was just always the first to smile. And Padmavajra's got this immediate warmth, this immediate open-heartedness, and this immediate smile, which seems to so personify him. Sometimes at Pamaloka, he lives at a men's retreat centre in Norfolk, where he's mostly involved with men who are asked for ordination. We also have a women's ordination training retreat centre, but Padmavajra is mostly involved with men who are asked for ordination. And sometimes he may not be on the retreat that I'm on, or that I've been on, or the weekend I'm on, or whatever it is. Sometimes all I see is I see him walk across the courtyard with his porridge bowl, and he just sort of makes this particular face to me, so I can't, or even this particular sort of strange gesture. He's got quite a whole symphony of somewhat unusual gestures, taken from some sort of rap culture or something. Which he has a nascent interest in. Sometimes he just makes this sort of gesture. I won't try to mimic the gesture because I don't think I can pull it off. But it somehow just communicates this real love. Yeah. So that's the first quality I wanted to introduce him by. And by golly, that is the quality we all want and need. Without that quality, nothing else moves. Without that quality, wisdom is just thought. Without that quality, energy is just energy. You need love, don't you, for anything to feel worthwhile to move. But then that combined with Padmavajra with this incredible instinct for a kind of indefinable quality, which is something like the quality of reality, the quality of meaning, the quality of value, all those words far too grandiose in a way. But he has this real instinct for what we're really doing, for what the Dharma life is really about, for what humanity needs to be really about, for what is important, what's essential. Sometimes I think he sometimes struggles to be able to find ways to communicate that instinct. It's a very, very deep instinct for Padmavajra indeed. And if you can meet him, and if you're in touch with that instinct yourself, an instinct for the real, for the integral, for the Dharma, if you're in touch with that instinct, you can meet him on that instinct very, very reliably every time you meet him. And you meet him with that instinct in this kind of atmosphere of love. That instinct he has, it would almost be rather a bit much without that love, because it's so true and integral in itself. Without that love, it might feel a bit, it might even feel a bit sort of alarming. A very strong instinct, a physical instinct for the truth of things. Much more I could say about him, but those are the two things that immediately come to mind, is his lovingness, and that lovingness being, it's been so much part of my life. I mean, I met Padmavajra when I was 25 or something like that, and it's been a constant in my life since then. And another, that constant of that instinct for what the Dharma really is, especially what Bhante is really trying to say, for what we're really trying to do here in the converted fire station in Bethnal Green, what we're trying to do in a converted farm in Norfolk, what we're trying to do in India, wherever it is. Yeah. So those are the two things I wanted to introduce him by. Yeah. The two things I wanted to introduce him by. Okay, so I wanted to start this exploration. I don't want to start straight away with Padmasambhava, because you should never walk up to the deity straight away, shouldn't you? That's unseemly. You shouldn't just walk straight up to the God figure, the figure of the divine. You need to sort of walk circuitously. So I wanted to start with you, Padmavajra, to say, I mean, it's sort of a simple question. How did the Dharma enter your life? Because Padmasambhava, represents the Dharma. Padmasambhava, the figure of Padmasambhava is stepping down towards us, and he's looking directly at us. So one way of thinking about him is the Dharma entering your life. Traditionally he went to Tibet and brought the Dharma to Tibet, so he becomes an image for the Dharma entering the particular life of a culture, but also of an individual. So I thought we could start with how the Dharma entered your life as a very young man, as an individual, when you were 17, 18?
Yeah, so I think probably things started to sort of kick off probably when I was a bit younger. I was about 16, I would say. I think there were, all sorts of things, isn't it? How we arrive, at Buddhism or whatever it is. There's not one thing, but I think music was very, very important to me. It still is, and there was certain music that I was listening to that was sort of inducing ecstasy. Didn't need drugs, folks. It was. There were drugs later, but it was much more direct than that. It was particularly, modern American jazz, John Coltrane, people like that, had a very, very big effect on me. And this, I think, and probably there were things even before that. I was brought up a Christian, but didn't, went to church regularly and all that. And I had a sort of sense, I think, of, let's call it the sacred or something like that, and this feeling there's much more to this world than meets the eye. And I would never could get on quite with believing in God, and Christ didn't really make a big impact, but I always felt that there was something, as it were, beyond. It was sort of quite vague, and there were a whole number of experiences either induced by music or in a sense more directly, which were just unignorable really. I didn't know what they were. I thought that I was in direct communication with God at one point, and because it happened in a Catholic chapel, I tried to convert to Catholicism, but I think my headmaster was thinking, because strangely, I was brought up an Anglican, but I went to a Catholic school. I can't go into that. I think the headmaster thought I was taking the mickey or something, and didn't allow that. So that was quite good. But that sort of feeling of something higher, that I needed to find something, was very, very strong. 16, 17, and I, for one reason or another, but I don't really know why, I knew I had to read a book about Tibetan Buddhism. and fortunately I was directed to Lama Govinda's books, particularly Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism and The Way of the White Clouds. Lama Anagara Govinda was a German Buddhist who was initiated into Tibetan tradition, and one of the things I found thrilling about Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism was I didn't really understand it.
No, it's not an easy book.
And I think I read that when I was about 16, 17, something like that. And you think, I quite like reading books I can't understand. I quite enjoy that. But there were some things that were really clear in that. One, there was no God in Buddhism, which was no creator. So there was no limit on where you could go. And two, consciousness was just wide open. He charts in that book consciousness, what is possible, and you can do it if you meditate and you find a teacher. Well, we're talking now the late 70s, mid 70s in a village in Sussex. Well, there weren't Buddhist teachers you could look up in the yellow pages, or there was no centre in Brighton at that time, my nearest town. And I was desperate. I mean, I can remember there was one particular holiday we had with my family in this beautiful peninsula down in Cornwall, St Anthony in Roseland, amazing name, this sort of rather shambolic hotel, and it was this sort of feeling of real enchantment, reading Lama Govinda and going off in this very magical place where, I remember this old man telling me that the chapel in this particular place is where ley lines crossed and where Jesus had visited and all this sort of thing, and reading Lama Govinda. And I remember coming back from that holiday feeling absolutely bereft and this intense sort of sorrow and longing to find somebody to teach me. I remember looking at the old cover of The Way of the White Clouds, where there's a picture of Lama Govinda, and just looking at it and meditating on it and trying to sort of find, almost entreating. I didn't know quite what I needed, but and then I was visiting the local kind of hippie shop in Brighton at the time, where I got incense and things like that, and there was a little note saying that the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order were going to start a centre in Brighton, and if anybody was interested, they should come to this address. And I thought they probably weren't real Buddhists because they were called the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, but it was a very, very boring name. I thought, it wasn't the secret order of the lamas of the diamond tradition or something. But I met an order member there named Buddhadasa, who was a little bit disappointing because, I was sort of hoping I'd meet a lama in red robes or something, and there he was wearing, just a sort of brown jumper and a pair of Levi's. Levi's were cool, but I didn't expect that. But and he was friendly. It was in a slightly English, although he's Welsh, I discovered on the way. But thing was, he was doing this class and he invited me into it, and I'm really glad it was the class it was. It was a full-scale Metabhavana. So this is my first night, so full-scale Metabhavana. So I'm trying to sit in full lotus miserably and not getting on too well. No wonder I've got a bad back now. And then a sevenfold puja. And by the end of the puja, doing the mantras, I knew I was going to be a Buddhist. And it was so clear that that was what was going to happen. And I actually knew I'd be an order member, and I didn't even know what one was. I knew I was going to be like Buddhadasa. And okay, I was 17, no life experience really, still at home, all the rest of it, I hadn't done very much. But there was something it was definitive. It was a sort of quiet joy. I'd sort of found the way I wanted to, I knew this language. I just knew it. I'm not talking about previous lives or anything like that. It was just very, very clear. you know, and I'm so glad that that was my first encounter, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to be in connection. I wanted to be intimate, if you like, with something sacred, something divine. You know, I think that's what I really longed for. I think I didn't believe in the world that was presented to me. And of course, it's all mixed in. At 17, I'm still basically an adolescent, you know what I mean? So it's not as if, because people sometimes say, oh, you must have been so mature. Well, I wasn't. I was incredibly immature and, you know, really didn't know anything. But I did know that. I did know, you know, what I wanted to devote my life to. And yeah, so that's the journey. Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't mean to ask you this, but it does make you wonder a bit about previous lives, doesn't it?
It does, but you know, it's like I think you talk about previous lives, but I you know, people get a bit grandiose about them. You know, I think maybe with a, you know, it's possible I was a sort of I don't know, toilet cleaner or something, a lama suri or something like that. I don't, you know, and just managed to overhear the kind of pujas or something like that. I don't think it's anything elevated. You know, or the pub was near the temple or something. You know,
it's interesting that it was the metta and the puja, because both of those things have become so something so deep for you. Is the nature of metta and the nature of love.
Yeah.
You often stress that in your own teaching, the importance of metta, and you very often stress, you know, in our interactions and in the friendship you showed me and towards so many others, you very often stress devotion. So it is sort of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think that's my... I mean, Sangharakshita once said to me years ago when I was in a bit of a crisis, he looked at me and said, "You're a very, very emotional person." I mean, this wasn't that long ago, and nobody had ever actually said that to me. But I think that's true, and you know, and I think very, very emotional people, and I suspect I'm not unusual. I think probably most people are more emotional than they give themselves credit for. I mean, you need to do the Metta-bhavana, because if I don't, well, the emotions go a bit sort of haywire, and you know, they can be unpleasant and so on. And you know, I need devotion. You know, I think you need to adore. I think that's such an important part of life. And if you're not adoring, you know, that, you know, your highest values in life, the three jewels in our case, in however they manifest, well, you're going to, you know, what are you going to adore? You know, I think that's so important. I think a lot of the time people get really sort of messed up because they don't express those emotions, you know, in you know, to those objects that are worthy of those emotions. I think a lot of people long to adore, and unfortunately it comes out in rather odd ways. And you know, and sometimes I do feel a kind of frustration in the sort of very highly secularized world in which we live, and in which I think a lot of Buddhists are in, actually. That there are times when I do sort of fantasize about being in a culture where, you know, it would be understood that you would, you know, prostrate down the street, or you know, you'd very openly express your devotion and your faith. I went to Sacré-Cœur recently in Paris, and I really was knocked over by the I mean, apparently there's been prayer there since its inception, and this community of nuns singing this singing, you know, just chanting this mass, I guess, and the feeling of devotion and reverence and a sense of the sacred was really palpable. Yeah. I
mean, and you know, you've had that very strongly in your life, particularly through the figure of Padmavajra. So you took on the Padmavajra sadhana when you were ordained. How long ago was that now?
40 years.
Right, 40 years.
Is it 40? 76, is that right?
40 years.
Yeah.
It's 40 years in of adoring Padmavajra. So before, again, I get you to talk more about Padmavajra, right? You know, you've got these words like sadhana.
Yeah.
You're given your sadhana, which is, people usually talk about your visualization practice, not a very good term for it, but you know, you're given a particular practice where you're you're given a Buddha or Bodhisattva figure to contemplate, to adore. I prefer the word adore to an image for the sacred. I thought it would be good to just say a little bit about why do we do that? You know,
why do we do that? Yes.
Why is it? Well, why sadhana? Why do Bhante choose to give us sadhanas, and why not give them before ordination?
Oh, yeah.
What is the meaning of sadhana? You know, for people who are sort of newer to things as well, with that in mind. You know.
I think so. You know, we could give a series of. You could have a whole course on this in Dharmanight. I mean, I think it's very important to root this in the ancient Buddhist tradition. I think that's very important because I think, you know, some people think, oh, it's a falling away from, you know, the Buddha's pristine teaching. Is it just turning, you know, a non-theistic tradition into something theistic and all that sort of thing? Of course, in the time of the Buddha, there was this very important practice called recollection of the Buddha, Buddhanusmriti or Buddhanusati. And if you look at the original meaning of the word sati or smriti, it means to remember. It's memory, it's the word for memory. And it comes, I think, out of something entirely natural. The disciples of the Buddha would want to remember their teacher. You know, they're not, you know, when we read the old text, we see, the Buddha. Well, of course, for them, he was their spiritual friend, their Kalyana Mitra, their teacher, the embodiment of, the living embodiment of the highest values in their life. And of course, it's the most natural thing in the world to remember your teacher in that culture. You know, well, it's still true actually in many cultures. It's not just Buddhist, I would say. You get it very strongly in Sufism, that the recollection of your sheikh, your peer, you visualize in the heart, because he's your, or she sometimes is your connection, you know, with that. So in the Buddhist tradition, it's the most natural thing in the world to remember your teacher. And of course, over time, that sort of develops and people start having visions of all sorts of Buddhas and so on and so forth, you know, quite naturally, because there's, I think one of the things we don't always get in the West is we tend to think that reality must be sort of, when we say it's beyond words and beyond conception and beyond shape and so on and so forth, the danger for us is that that's just becomes an idea. It's just very abstract. Actually, I think the more real something is, the more personal and concrete it is. It's seen and felt on the pulses, as we heard the other night in Poetry East. And Sangharakshita has said that our highest category is personhood. It's not some abstract idea, it's personhood. Why? Because we are persons, we are people, and we are extremely important to ourselves. You know, this particular shape, and other people are extremely important to us. So the most natural thing in the world is for your ideals, your values, to be seen as a living person. That's the most natural thing to do. It's not weird, it's not deifying, it's the most natural thing to see enlightenment as a living person, a living presence, that you can have, as it were, an emotional relationship, not just emotional, intellectual, a total relationship with. And, you know, as it's what seems to have happened in India and Tibet and China and the whole development, even in the Southeast Asian countries, which are generally regarded as, you know, they have very, very strong meditations on the Buddha and so on. But this becomes a whole sort of path. And in you know what developed in the end, particularly in Tantric Buddhism, when you commit yourself to the path really fully under a teacher, you're given what's known as your greatly desired deity, Ishtadevata, your greatly desired deity. And this can get a bit technical and complicated, but it's that particular personification, that's not the right word, but that particular kind of expression of enlightenment as a person, which really speaks to you, which in a sense is you, in the deepest possible sense. So when I was ordained, Sangharakshita said to me at the time of ordination, he said, okay, now it's the time for me to give you the mantra of the Bodhisattva you're going to meditate on. And he said two things. He said, this is you at the end of the path. So what you're doing in that meditation, you're imagining, you're longing for what you will be when you've undergone a full, transformation through Buddhist practice. You're contemplating the end, if you like. You're bringing the end to the beginning, in a sense. You're starting at the top and almost working backwards. And then he said another rather mysterious thing, which I'm still meditating on, which I don't understand. He said, this is you as you really are, in a completely different dimension. In eternity, if you like. This is this is your as it were your true nature. But he didn't use that language. So when you're ordained, what you're doing at ordination, you're making this. Well, we use the word commitment, which is a rather, in a way, cold, almost political term. You're making a vow, really, a very, very solemn vow, where you're going to practice, you're going to gain enlightenment, you're going to follow the path, you're going to participate in the Sangha, and you're doing that for the benefit of all within this particular tradition. And it's only when you make that kind of solemn vow or commitment that you can really take on a meditation like this. It's the expression of that, it's like the oath you take. It's the way I see ordination. It's such a strong bond. Before that, you're sort of trying things out, really. And I think one of the difficulties, I think, of the modern world in some ways is that you can go on the internet and you can find any sadhana you like, even the most sort of complicated. Well, that's meaningless, really. I mean, these things should be more secret in the sense of they're very much of the heart. They are very, very intimate. I'm going to say they're very personal in a certain sort of way, but not in any sort of psychological sense. They're secret, in spiritually secret, if you like. Very, very intimate. To do with the very nature of you and your endeavour, to follow this path. I'm conscious I'm not saying this quite as I'd like to, but is it helpful?
It's coming over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you say anything more about, I'm slightly wondering this thing about ordination, you're given your sadhana, you're given the greatly desired deity
you're given it. It's more that I think really what happens is that the preceptor actually sees that connection. It's giving in that sense. I mean, I felt definitely I was given something by Sangharakshita, but I think it was more he was recognising that this is there. This is the connection. It was more sort of like that, I would say. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
But in what way does that? I'm somehow trying to get to the heart of what ordination is for us.
Right.
In what way does that exemplify the ordination? And because you could get one, you could print one off tonight, couldn't you? Why not? In a world where everybody now thinks, they want the most expensive version of it. Everybody wants the highest thing. Why not start with it? Why not? Why only ordination?
Well, I think I can only sort of repeat myself, really. The nature of ordination is, we say it's a witnessing of. I mean, we use this expression, effective going for refuge, which is I think one of the things that's going on at ordination is that the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, while remaining sublime and transcendent ideals, have become very concrete in your life. You know, they in a sense, you've moved closer to them and they've moved closer to you. I like the definition of Shraddha, which is usually translated as faith, as placing the heart upon. And I think what you're really recognising at the time of ordination, what I do when I ordain somebody, I'm seeing that their heart is their heart is really placed on the three jewels. It doesn't mean that you can't fall back. It doesn't mean that you're enlightened. It doesn't mean you're a stream entrant. But there is this sort of shift, this turn, if you like, of their being in that direction. And that's what you're recognising. And I think it's only when you got that you can have this more, seriously sort of intimate and committed connection with a Buddha or Bodhisattva. It's only when, if you like, enlightenment turns to you. Right, yeah. Before that, it's all sort of provisional. It's all trial runs. And I think that you have to, you see the other aspect of ordination is that there's a definite community of disciples that you're entering. The disciples of the preceptors, who are the disciples of preceptors, the disciples of Sangharacharya. There's a lineage thing that goes on. You're definitely entering a particular community, and there are particular responsibilities. So it's not anything sort of, as it were, airy-fairy or abstract. It's about real people living this life. And it's only then, when you do that you can, I think, seriously meditate on a Buddha or Bodhisattva. I mean, I did do stuff before I was ordained because I was so desperate to. I mean, when you became a Mitra in those days, you were allowed to meditate on Shakyamuni. I did prostrations before I was ordained to Padmavajra, but there was a qualitative difference after ordination. You do mantras in pujas, but it was as if, in that moment, a sort of line was crossed, if you like. So it became much, much more vivid, much more serious, I would say.
So I want to come back in a minute to that qualitative shift that you talk about, but also, just before that, just coming back to what you were saying about the three jewels of Buddha, Dharma and Sangha becoming concrete in your life, becoming really manifesting in your life. In other words, not just an idea and so on. So that's a life thing, isn't it? That's not just about meditation.
Yeah, it's not just about meditation. Meditation is very important, but it has to be everything. Regardless of your living conditions. It doesn't mean you become a monk or a nun or anything like that, but it has to be your total life. You can't be a part-time Buddhist. I mean, what if you're thinking of yourself as a part-time Buddhist? Well, that's good. That's a start. But when you make that serious commitment, then it's it's the real deal. I mean, you can't sort of have a part-time path to enlightenment, or you're a Buddhist one week and a Hindu the next and a Sufi the week after that. That's not the way this works. I mean, there has to be, in any tradition you care to look at requires, a total engagement. I think it's anything, any creative endeavour, being, from what I can understand, being an artist, a poet, a writer, a musician, whatever it might be, it takes all of you. It really does. There's no place for a dilettante, Buddhist.
I suppose one of the reasons why I'm stressing it a bit is that because we don't wear robes in our tradition, it's very easy, perhaps, to think that it doesn't mean very much, like we're amateur Buddhists or something like that.
Well, we are amateurs. I mean, I'm not a professional. Never want to be. I never want to be a professional Buddhist. That just sounds too slick to me. I mean, amateurs do. Doesn't it? The etymology of amateur, isn't it? For the love of. And I'm definitely an amateur in that way. But I mean, professional just sounds slick. I know some slick, Buddhists and slick meditation. I mean, they're boring. I mean, I think amateur sort of implies you're trying and very often failing, and and I like that. I like that fact. I like that it's a bit, that it isn't all sort of, smooth and straightforward. I like that. I mean, coming back to Padmasambhava, I was talking we were having a discussion at Padmavajra with Arloka, who painted that. Painted the original of that, and that's a bit brighter than it is in our shrine room. It's much more muted. And somebody was saying, couldn't we have another Padmasambhava that was brighter? And Arloka made the really good point. He said, not sure about that, because Padmasambhava is a liminal figure, a very mysterious figure. Is he historical? Is he archetypal? And when you read these very legendary, symbolic biographies of Padmasambhava, it's not quite clear whether he's a saint or a sinner. And I think that's important. I think that's important, that you can't sort of pin that down. And I associate that with, something more amateur and all that sort of thing. Yeah, so we don't wear robes, we might on ceremonial occasions, but in a way I like that. I find that interesting. Yeah.
So let's go back to this qualitative difference you felt having done. So first, perhaps, why did you choose the Padmasambhava as your greatly desired deity? Or
well, actually, I was in conflict at the time because I think, if I'm honest, I was hoping he'd give me two. Very greedy in those days. He saw right through me though, so I wasn't sure whether to take Vajrasattva or Padmasambhava, and he said, no, I'll start you off with Padmasambhava, you can do another one later, quite rightly. And he knew that devotion. He actually mentioned that, and I think there really wasn't going to be any other. I think that was just an sort of idea about the other figure, and so that was that. That was done. Yeah.
And what was the qualitative shift after you took on that?
Well,
can you say something about your?
Yeah, the qualitative shift was a little bit scary, to be honest. And it's very hard to understand these things, and in a way, perhaps it's not something in a way to talk too much about. But the experience was of a tremendous, and that's an understatement, a tremendous sort of energy, like a sort of thunderbolt kind of energy that was sort of unleashed. I thought that Sangharakshita had given me some tantric initiation or something like that, and this sort of sense of the mantra that he gave just going on with its own sort of power and force, and this tremendous sense of meaning. And again, that's an understatement, and I don't mean a meaning that I could necessarily articulate in any particular concept, more like a sort of kind of. Well, Sangharakshita, I was reading recently his account of him receiving the Padmasambhava sadhana from his teacher, the great Karchu Rinpoche. And he said for Karchu Rinpoche, Padmasambhava was a spiritual reality. And it was one of those things you read in Sangharakshita and you don't notice it the first time. And then you think, crikey, what does that mean? So in other words, not an exotic Orientalist figure, nothing like that, but a spiritual reality. And I suppose, without wanting to make any claims at all, I think I got a taste of that, of what that might be, to some extent. And it was absolutely overwhelming and frightening, actually, in the end. I mean, in a way, wonderful, but really frightening. I think another thing that was going on, in a way, to put it more, in a more perhaps explicable way, is I used this expression that at the time of ordination, the preceptor witnesses you're going for refuge directly. They see that you're effectively going for refuge, not as an idea, but they know you. They know that you are seriously vowing to follow the Buddhist life, and that you can do that under the right conditions. And the thing is, this language of witnessing, I think, is extraordinarily profound. That is actually what a tantric initiation is, because we're looking back, and being given called Padmavajra, and I couldn't believe the name I was given. Just extraordinary name, which is a name of Padmasambhava and all that, and very rich symbolism. And looking back, I was being taken absolutely seriously by the man I most revered in this life. Much more, I was being taken more seriously than I took myself. As if without it being said in so many words, it was as if what was going on, the message was, this isn't a game, this isn't, I was 19 at the time, this isn't some kind of teenage thing, this is the real thing. And like I say, I think he took me much more seriously than he took myself. And I think that unleashes forces. I think that unleashes very, very powerful energy. So I remember the night after my public ordination, when we got back to London, a very, very good friend of mine, Visantra, one of my Kalyana Mitras, we were sharing the room I was in at number 5, the famous number 5 Balmoral Street up in Archway, where we were all living around the then North London centre. And he shared my tiny room with me, and in the middle of the night I had this semi-waking dream of a thunderbolt, a lightning bolt being issued from this tanker of Padmavajra right into my chest, and it was the most frightening thing I've ever had. And I can remember hauling myself out of this state and waking him up with the words, it's the picture, it was like something out of M.R. James or something. And I think, anyway, what was your question? I think that's another way you could speak about this. That ordination, that it unleashes energies, if you like, and it certainly did that with me. I think that energy is still running on. Well, I know it is. It's still, but it took a long time, I think, to. In a way, it was almost prophetic, I think, of the sort of difficulties that I would have later because of my immaturity. Getting into all sorts of difficult situations and not behaving very skillfully and so forth, and having to kind of be humbled quite a lot of times by life and so on, but it's all part of this unfolding of Buddhist life, but particularly focused on this particular figure that I meditate on. Because another way you could look at it, it's, we use this word myth. It's an unfortunate word to use in some sense, because people think that it's fantasy, but myth we live by myths. We live by very, very deep stories. You couldn't be a human being without living by myths. And I think that another way you could look at what happens at ordination when you're introduced to a figure like this is that you're unfolding a myth, if you like, in your life. Not in any systematic way. It can't be, by definition. You just get little glimpses of it, and or you even look back at earlier experience, and then you realise, my goodness, there was something unfolding there that is part of this journey of transformation which the meditation practice embodies. I hope this is making sense, and you're not all thinking, God, I'm with a mad kind of cultish kind of person. I am actually very down to earth and watch football matches and things like that. So
I don't. I watch footballers. Sometimes my jokes don't quite work. Anyway.
Well, you did play football with me.
I did play football.
You wanted to know when we were going to start hugging.
Yeah.
Have to score a goal first. Yeah.
I wish I wouldn't make these jokes. Anyway, let's go back to something serious. Just saying about what you were saying about Bhante Sangharakshita taking you more seriously than you took yourself. Seems to me that that's almost a definition of what blessing is.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can't bless yourself ever, can you? Because
no, not really.
You can only bless yourself with the self that you've got, which you need someone who sees more of you than you do.
Yes.
To bless you.
Yeah.
In a way, you could almost think that that's what Padmavajra represents: is someone who sees your enlightened nature, sees that in you. As
yes,
it were.
Indeed. Yeah.
And I just wonder whether there's this, because I kind of still circuitously going towards Padmavajra, is that, well, Padmavajra is so important to Bhante Sangharakshita, the founder of our movement. It's the only festival traditionally that we've celebrated a particular figure. At the LBC we do celebrate other figures. We've had Vajrasattva Day and so on. But when I came along, and when you came along much before then, it was Padmasambhava Day was the only figure that we celebrated in that way. I wonder whether there's some particular relationship between Bhante Sangharakshita, the founder of the movement, and Padmasambhava. Whether there's something you can sort of say about that.
Well, I mean, you look in his memoirs, there's this particular account of him coming across a Padmasambhava image in Darjeeling in a temple, and it's a very vivid description of the image, and how one of the things he said about it was that the figure was mysterious and strange and yet familiar, and this sense that the figure had always been there with him. And it was more he was waking up to something, to, as it were, the reality that Padmasambhava communicated, though he didn't translate that at all into any kind of conceptual framework. He just said, he just described the image very vividly.
And that's when he was still a Theravada monk.
He was still that's right, he was still that, but with a deep sympathy to all Buddhist traditions. But he saw that image, and then of course as time went on he started to have more contact with Tibetans and Tibetan lamas, and also this sense, there was always a thread with Sangharakshita, with Bhante, of the need for he framed it very early on in terms of going beyond the ego, but how can you go beyond the ego with the ego? And he found help in the writings of Thomas Merton, where Thomas Merton talks about obedience to the abbots, one of the monastic vows, where you sort of Christian monastic vows, where you surrender to the abbot. And he was very taken with this because of the way Merton wrote about it. So he decided to give up his will to his teacher Jagdish Kashyap, which eventually led him to Kalimpong. And there are various other things that happen, and this need for being in connection with a higher dimension, to transcend your self-clinging, your egotism, your conceit, all those things. It's a thread that actually goes through his writing. So when he was, this in a way is what led him to, one of the things that led him to initiation in the Tibetan tradition, where you're introduced to a bodhisattva, which you are going to serve and open up to. Originally it was his yidam is green Tara. That was the first bodhisattva he was given. But later on, a great teacher named Jamyang Khensi gave him a number of initiations into different bodhisattvas. But he also instructed his disciple Karchu Rinpoche to give Bhante the Padmasambhava sadhana. He's very, very keen that this happened. And so he was initiated into that and given the name Urgyen Sangharakshita by this teacher. Urgyen is the name of Padmasambhava's birthplace, where he originally sprung from a lotus, this sort of mythical land which is sort of identified now with somewhere in what's now Pakistan, the Swat Valley, I think. It's not quite clear. But it means Sangharakshita, from the land of Urgyen. That's there's an affinity with where Padmasambhava comes from.
I remember Bhante wanting that to be used as well.
Yes, that's right.
He wanted that to be used.
And what's interesting, in a way, he has never said very much about Padmasambhava.
No,
there's the celebrated lecture he gave here, when the Nalanda crest out the front was unveiled, which originally was a sort of bootleg, cassette thing, because for some reason he didn't want it released. That's the story, and I managed to, it was, you could pay good money in those days for a cassette of that. But I mean, there he really unfolds what, if you like, the energy of Padmasambhava is really all about, and the big emphasis is on transformation. The transformation of all energies, if you like, on the path to enlightenment. Even energies which seem hostile, that are anti, are taken along the path. And I asked him once, quite a long time after I was ordained, what was I really doing when I meditated on Padmasambhava? And he said, well, the way I see it, you're transforming. He said, it's not really evil or anything like that. It's natural energies the sort of natural sort of energies of the earth and the natural energies in you. And these are being taken on the path. And of course, this sort of relates to the whole sort of, you talk about energies, emotions, if you like, this whole thing this insight that Sangharakshita had as a very young man, that the central issue for most people, read all people, in the Buddhist life, the spiritual life, is to find emotional equivalence to intellectual understanding. We know everything, we know, but emotionally we lag behind. And you could certainly see the mythology of Padmasambhava, the practice of Padmasambhava is all about the transformation of if you like, the deepest possible forces. Because you're not going to get anywhere in Buddhist practice or with anything unless you're profoundly emotionally involved.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because Bhante took on the green Tara sadhana, and then he said that after then it felt like his life was sort of, I can't remember the word he used, governed.
Directed always by that higher
right.
dimension.
So you could imagine having a Tara day, for instance, that he, and yet he doesn't seem to have talked about Padmasambhava very much, just a few tiny things.
Yeah.
And yet, Padmasambhava is taking the Dharma to a new culture is part of his.
Well, I think there's so many elements. I think there's the element of transformation of a new culture into, by the forces of the Dharma. There's that, but also, increasingly, I'm when I meditate on Padmasambhava, it's very much the archetype. Sangha actually, one place speaks of him as the archetypal guru. The archetypal teacher, and I'm sort of feeling that more and more, that what I meditate on is this figure that is, if you like, it's very hard to describe this. When you meditate on these figures, you when you say it just sounds so prosaic. When you're actually in the meditation, you're in a sense you have a different mind going on. I find it very difficult. I hate these meditation reviews and interviews. Can't bear them. I'm sure they're helpful, but because I think you're trying to use a mind which isn't going on in meditation. But increasingly it seems to me that what you're there is a great need, I think, in everybody for a teacher. I don't mean that by that, again, somebody who makes enormous claims about attainments and all that sort of thing. But if you like, an openness, a sense of reverence to teaching, if you like, to learning, that from a higher dimension. So increasingly when I meditate on Padmasambhava, as if it's like sort of, I like that old Indian way of talking, of taking darshan, of seeing and being seen by that wiser, deeper, highly skilled sort of dimension of things. And I think the more I open up to that in this sort of archetypal ideal realm, it means the more open I think I am to it wherever that is happening. And I think that's such it's so important, in our lives to have that. And you can never people have to find it. I think more, the word guru is related to the Indian word for reverence. Gaurava means to revere. It means literally weighty, and guru means somebody weighty with spiritual qualities. So you revere that which or which has weight, real spiritual transcendent weight for you. And it seems to me that we're living in times where even being willing to revere is becoming increasingly difficult. You're seen as naive. You're seen as, it's such a cynical age where, people build people up and then cast them down. The whole emphasis seems to be on celebrity, and there's a terrible sort of lack, I think, of if you like, being able to revere, and yet it's so human. I think there's such a deep human need to revere, intelligently revere, and not expect people to be perfect, and not, demand the this, that, or the other, but to be able to look up and to be able to say, yeah, that person is greater than me. That thing is greater than me. To be able to do that is the beginning of the Dharma, I think, the beginning of living the life. If you can't do that, I don't think you can really grow. I really don't think you can.
And do you think
it's
the
possible.
sort of, the Padmavajra guru, it's like the teacher, because I think probably people might be happy to look up to an image, and they would.
Yeah.
Or
I think if you, of course, it's great fun when you got sort of the pictures and the image of the Buddha and all the rest of it, and you read the suttas, and because they're hagiographies, they're presented as perfection. You've got to be able to revere people who are, got smelly armpits. You know what I mean? And who make mistakes. You know what I mean? Who aren't absolutely perfect. If you can't do that, you're stuffed. To use a technical term.
I think it's a Sanskrit term.
Yes. Yeah. Really, and I think that I mean, one of the things I noticed about India, because, we have this practice called the going for refuge and prostration practice, where you're doing full-length prostrations while you're visualising this lotus tree with all these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on it, including Padmavajra with the Buddha at the centre. And you sometimes see people say, I'm not sure about these prostrations and all this sort of thing, and we have Sangharakshita on the tree because, it's through him that the Dharma's come. Well, I don't think Sangharakshita is perfect and all that sort of thing. Well, of course not. It's not going to be like that, is it? But one of the things I noticed, partly there's a cultural thing here. We still I think people are still basically Christian. And it's all saved and damned, perfect, imperfect, saint or sinner, that kind of duality, which is such a bore. One of the things I noticed in India, I learnt a lot in India about reverence and respect. I'd be with my Indian order member friends. These are, you have to remember, Buddhist people come from, the most difficult part of society and very, very poor. But some of them had good government jobs, very well educated. We'd go on tour. We'd go to their village. The first thing they would do would be to prostrate to their old mum and dad, take the dust from their feet, go to their primary school teacher and things like that. Again, a prostration. And I thought, well, they're not saying these people are enlightened. That's not what it's nothing to do with what these people have helped them. They've given to them, they've taught them, they've nurtured them, and they deserve that reverence and respect. To me, that's a much more highly developed culture, a culture that does that, than for all the sort of sophistication that you get in the West. Actually, we're nowhere culturally, because we can't revere, people who are worthy of reverence, people who've put out a hand to us and helped us and nurtured us, beginning with our mum and dad, however imperfect they may have been. They did bring us into the world, and so on. Sorry, I've gone off on one, haven't I?
No, I'm just trying to think which one.
Yeah.
Where are we going to go from here? I'm trying to think. I don't know whether this is the right question, really, but we keep on touching on Padmavajra and
yes, we're not
glancing off, and that seems to be part of the meaning of Padmavajra. But what is he for us? Are we if we're not?
Oh right, yeah.
If we're not, if we've not got a visualization practice, if we've not got a sadhana, what are we missing? Are we missing something?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's not that you can't, because if you have, I know you have talks here on and you have, pujas and things and talks about different figures. Of course, you can find before you're ordained very deep feelings. I think I had deep feelings for these figures before I was ordained, except in those days you could get ordained quite quickly. Whoops. But of course, if you find your feelings flowing in that direction, I'd really encourage that. But I suppose there comes a point where making a commitment to something, to a figure like that, you can't separate from going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, having a teacher, a preceptor, and number of teachers, being part of a community. It's part and parcel of that. It's inseparable from that.
So is there a sense that we're trying to form a sort of community on earth, and the Bodhisattvas are like, as it were, a community in heaven?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting way of talking about it. I mean, some of you might know I've had an interest in Sufism for a while, so get that in. But I remember years ago reading a very famous French brilliant writer on Sufi themes, Henri Corbin. And he is very interesting because, of course, in Islam generally, Allah can't be depicted, shouldn't be depicted. And yet the great Sufis like Ibn Arabi say, well, no, there is a way in which the transcendent God does actually show himself in a form. Other Sufis have followed suit. And he speaks about the relationship between the disciple and the sort of personal Lord, as it were, as that between it's a sort of chivalrous relationship. It's sort of lord and vassal, if you like. It's you are serving that particular manifestation of the divine, if you like, through living a spiritual life. And he says the relationship is it's a dialectic. You need that manifestation for all your sense of meaning and being and living. That figure which is transcendent needs you to manifest. It can't just manifest. It needs your active cooperation. I found this very inspiring from the point of view of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I don't know if you can speak of the Bodhisattvas needing us, and of course the Bodhisattvas are these crystallizations of the fullness of wisdom and compassion. I need Padmavajra for meaning, the whole realm of undefined meaning and purpose. If you like, he sums up, he takes hold of all of the aspects of the Dharma that I'm aspiring to and that I love. In a sense, perhaps he needs me to manifest those qualities in this, in this world. So then I see my life as a sense of service, if you like. So you're trying to sort of live that out, not in a terribly self-conscious and artificial way. So I'm walking down Roman Road and I'm pretending to have a Vajra in my hand and fighting demons. Not like that. It's much more subtle than that. Yeah.
And so what, sort of slightly drawing this to a conclusion, but what has Padmasambhava got to teach us in particular? We have our Padmasambhava Day. We quite often evoke the figure. It's not just a personal thing, is it? It's also Padmasambhava was so important for our teacher.
Yeah.
So partly, perhaps it's to do with, particularly us in the West, needing a teacher. Is it to do with? Is he particularly teaching us that we need not be frightened of our all of our energies, that they can all go towards enlightenment?
I think one of the things is I think there's so many things actually. I mean, I think there's no one thing.
No.
But I remember that lecture that he gave here, where he read from the Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava, and you get these, descriptions of these cremation grounds, which he enters into ecstatically. Of course, it's just this wonderful sort of game, of going into this realm of the dead, and there are all these worldly darkinies doing all sorts of unspeakable things, like ripping out their entrails and dancing with their heads in their hands and all sorts of weird stuff. But it's the way it's written is so beautiful, and so it's like, it's just all this sort of horrific stuff. But I remember Sangharakshita said in a very humorous way, well, we've got to invite that energy in. It's okay if people come in like that, but you've got to meet it. You've got to meet that energy with the inspiration of Padmasambhava sort of rejoice in that energy, if you like, and gather it up onto the path. So it is to do with, as you say, not being frightened of those energies.
Spoken so much about energy, hasn't he?
Yes, he has.
It's almost a secret teaching within his teaching.
Oh, yes.
Is how are you going to live more? How is there going to be more energy? Because so often when we talk about Buddhism, it easily, I don't know, it can easily get frankly a bit dull, and or it can sort of lose energy, like it's a technical thing. Bhante so often seems to have wanted to come back to what enlivens you, even using the language of eros at times as a way of complete arousal.
Yes, yeah. Oh, yes. That's really, really important. That arousal. I mean, it's interesting in the if you look at the sort of some of the traditional meditations on Padmasambhava, you're instructed to identify yourself as a red darkini, completely naked. And I mean, whether you do that or not, in some ways that can be a bit of a distraction. But the whole point of that is that you, in the meditation, you're not just seeing the teacher out there, you're becoming the archetypal disciple. Totally aroused, absolutely open, wearing bone ornaments, so you've renounced long hair, you don't care what people think about you, you don't care what people say about you, all that matters is your intense focus on that higher dimension and being transformed by it. So I think that if we're going to put it in prosaic terms, I think that's the kind of thing, one of the things that Padmasambhava perhaps communicates.
Yeah, that would be a great place to finish. Thank you very much, Padma.
Thank you.
Maitreyabandhu, thank you very much to Padmavajra. What a treat to sit here and just hear a conversation which unfolds something of the essence of the Dharma life, and in doing so talks about lineage, talks about reverence, talks about our culture, talks about the teacher, the guru, talks about the importance of Kalyan Mitrata, of friendship. And then in seeing you two here, amateur Buddhists, I find it very heartening. You've got in Maitreyabandhu a practitioner of 30 years, almost 30 years, or something around 30 years. At the LBC, one of our most revered Dharma teachers and friend to many, many people, interviewing Padmavajra, who's befriended Maitreyabandhu. Padmavajra, a practitioner of over 40 years, just unfolding his own inspiration and sharing that with us very, very sort of intimately, just sharing some of the most precious, inspired aspects of his own Dharma life, which is still, of course, unfolding. And in doing so, talking about Bhante Sangharakshita, talking about Katsha Rinpoche, who initiated Bhante Sangharakshita in this practice of Padmasambhava, the archetypal guru. This whole lineage stretching back, that we, sitting here, sitting at the feet of Maitreyabandhu and Padmavajra, are sort of participating in. We're participating in some living tradition, which, however messy, however flawed and fumbling sometimes that tradition is connected to this energy that you ended on, this spiritual energy, which I think is the most exciting thing one can ever connect to in this life. So I just feel very, very grateful to sit here, watching you two, sitting at your feet, watching you unfold, just very, very naturally, something of that inspiration that has touched both of you and then flows on from. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.